We are a service industry. At the end of the day, that is our job. We're providing a service. That's what they want. That's what they need. It helps them out. It keeps their soil better. There is less erosion. We've had a lot of positive feedback on just guys saying that, yeah, we would rather have that, working it is easier. We keep all our soil on top. If you're trying to do no-till and you just got a couple strings of tile in there, it's gonna be a little bit of a rough ride for you.
Welcome to the Water Table Podcast. Today I have Kyle Whitcomb with me. Kyle's a third-generation farm drainage contractor. He's pretty much been working in the business his whole life.
Since I was 9 years old with Grandpa.
Yeah. And so it's fun to have you, Kyle. Kind of a local guy here in the west central Minnesota area. So knowing you a while and know your family and your business. And we had a few years ago, we did a little feature on your V-plow as something kind of unique in the industry. Was that 4 or 5 years ago?
That was about 3-4 years ago,
Okay.
I believe, yes.
And it was pretty new to you at the time, and thought it would just be fun to do a little podcast and talk about how it's going, what you're up to with the V-plow, how it's getting used, what are kind of the impressions of it of farmers that you're working for. So maybe start by just explaining to the audience what is a V-plow and the difference between a V-plow and a normal farm drainage plow.
So a V-plow basically kind of takes the big wedge of dirt, picks the entire thing up, and keeps all those soil horizons consistent. You keep your topsoil on top, you keep your clay from mixing up into everything, whereas straight shank is you do get some soil disturbance on the horizons. They mix up a little bit. And not only that, it's more or less, it takes about a year for that field to heal up to what it should be instead of that about 3-year range for just a straight shank. There are some limitations. It takes a bit more planning. There is a little more time that goes into getting that field set up correctly. And it is only a 4-inch attachment. So that's all you can run through it. So all your mains and sub mains, they are going to be with the straight shank, but done about 1,000 acres with it. And we've had a lot of positive feedback on just guys saying that, yeah, we would rather have that, working it is easier. We keep all our soil on top, even just spraying and kind of keeping the inputs where they should be instead of getting that mixed up dirt.
Yeah. And when you're talking, just back up a little bit, but the 4-inch attachment, the vast majority of tiling is done as your 4 inches your lateral.
Yes, I mean,
so
you're doing 99% of your stuff.
Yeah.
You're doing 4-inch.
Yeah.
So.
And when you're scratching the ground, it's a few places where there's a main, but the most, like you're saying, 90% of those.
Which if you tend those really good, you kind of can get away with not noticing that too.
Yeah. And, again, for those that aren't as familiar with the elements, a lot of fields with the 4-inch laterals, you're talking every 40 feet, 60 feet, 40 feet, somewhere in that range.
40 to 60 seems to be about average around here.
So you're, if you're going across a 40 or an 80, which would be probably the common size jobs you have.
Yep.
You're talking about a lot of disturbance that's happening.
Yeah, there's a lot of disturbance when you're using a straight shank, and I like it myself just for taking my trucks over the thing because I'm not bottoming those out every time.
And what do you think in that disturbance that's happening? You say it takes a year. Is it you're working for a lot of no-till guys on that? We can talk about that in a minute. But is it really just the freeze-thaw cycle and some moisture that's bringing it back to?
It's pretty much just that freeze-thaw cycle, and if you get a decent amount of snow and some good rain before you get out there and work it, it's basically taking it back down to pretty close to natural, because it kind of just lifts it up in a big wedge, puts it right back down where it needs to be. That top is all fluffed up and broken up, without spilling it all out to the side. So really it heals back amazing compared to just the normal straight shank.
And I know, one of the reasons why you ended up with it or decided to to go the V-plow route and have an opportunity for people to, because you do straight shank too, right?
Yeah, we do straight shank also.
So, but add that to your business was the no-till guys.
Yeah, I noticed they were leaving a fair amount of, crop if they weren't working everything down, which a lot of those no-till guys, once they get into it, they don't want to work it after you've done everything. They kind of use a pattern tile system as well. We're going to break up the ground with this pattern tile system. We'll get a little bit of aeration back in the soil. We'll kind of take that hard pack back out a little bit, and then we'll farm it for a while again. And
yeah, and we are starting to see a little bit more, cross country for sure, but even in this area, no-till. And I think what you're saying too is if you want the aeration in no-till, you really need pattern tiling.
You need to have a comprehensive plan, and if you're tiling already, it does work in pretty well to kind of plan in your pattern tile systems with your no-till systems and kind of work those in conjunction with each other.
Yep. So, talking about no-till, what other types of projects have you done that this works really well on?
Kind of a lot of edible beans situation fields. Beet farmers, they will get a hold of us, a lot of them the year before they even decide to put beets in. They'll say, hey, I want a pattern tile system put in, but I would like the V-plow, because when you're going over that field, however many times they spray a beet farm, which is quite a few, they say, no, we do a light working and we can just go with our sprayers at a normal rate. We're not slowing down, every 40 to 60 feet just to get over that bit of a dip.
Yeah. And for those that have seen a beet field when it's worked and ready to go and probably sprayed, you don't really know when they're spraying them when it's just coming up, but
they're spraying them. Yeah, they don't want to slow down.
But it looks like your lawn if you're seeding a lawn. I mean, it's just perfect. So for those that don't know it, so if you're, the sprayers too, and they're going across the field, they're not going 2 miles an hour. I mean, they're
moving.
So they want something that's not going to have to hit that it would really feel.
Which I wouldn't want to have them hit that either.
Of course. So what are from an operation standpoint as an operator of the V-plow, what do you see as some of the positives and maybe negatives around compared to the traditional shank plow?
Some of the positives are, we are a service industry. At the end of the day, that is our job. We're providing a service. So that works in that's what they want. That's what they need. It helps them out. It keeps their soil better. There is less erosion when you get on them steep side hills, so we're controlling that a little bit better. And I think just the time to not have to manage that farm for them 2 to 3 years of straight shank and getting that thing back up to exactly what it should be on the surface, I think that's a big deal for them. Some of the negatives on my end are it does take a little more planning. We are limited towards depth, which I like to get most of my tile lines about, foot into the clay layer anyways, because anything beyond that takes a lot longer for the soil to move that water. But so, you got to take a lot more planning. There might be a few more sub mains here or there. Everything's got to hit those marks where it's 3.5, 4 feet deep. Does take a little more fuel because she's a little heavier and she pulls a little harder.
Yeah.
But I think really it is offset in the long run for us to provide that service.
Yeah. Do you see any conditions in which it gets harder to, like if it's too wet or too dry, does it get really hard to pull when it gets really dry? Or
when she's really dry, it does take quite a bit more to pull the thing.
Yeah.
And if you got a no-till field where they're leaving quite a bit of corn stubble, you kind of got to plan around that a little bit too, because there will be a bit of a clogging issue if it starts to pile up in the front of it.
Yeah. What do you see as the future for, is there very many other people, around the country going the V-plow route or offering it? And what do you think that
We're the only ones in Minnesota that have been running it consistently. I think we might be the only ones in Minnesota that have one. I know we were one of the first ones that bought one in the area. There's a guy in the Dakotas, but I have seen them. Yeah, they are popping up more and more. There are more guys that are offering the V-plow system, because everybody's kind of calling it a low disturbance tile pattern system.
Yeah.
So they are starting to gain in popularity.
Yeah. We talked offline a little bit about the whole no-till situation, and we should get a no-till farmer on the podcast at some point. But from your perspective on that, you see that that's going to continue to grow.
I think it's going to be to the point where, it will start continuing to grow. And it might be a hybrid system. It might not be straight no-till. It could be a lot of, light tillage, maybe skipping every other year, something like that, and kind of letting that biomass on the top build up. But it's kind of what works for everybody, I mean, some guys they're still plowing stuff up, and that's what works for them.
Yeah. And I think, if you're going to, from what I can tell and knowing a few of these guys, to really understand how it's going to work for you, you got to be consistent in it for a while. Because
you have to do it for a while. It's not like everything in life. It's not a silver bullet that's going to take care of something right off the bat. It's something you got to try, and you got to see if that's actually going to work with your system.
Yeah, and you get different springs, different balls, and if you're not, if you're committed to it, you can plan for that. And whether it's drainage systems, whether it's how you're going to do your drainage, all of those things combined, and you need to have several years where you get those different weather patterns to really know.
Everybody should have a drainage plan every year regardless.
But where you really know how your yields are going to be with a no-till. If you go off from, I'm going to try it 1 year and that didn't work. Well,
it's not a consistent.
That doesn't work.
That's not enough information to make a consistent assessment of what a no-till really is.
Right. So you're gonna keep this as part of your offering and ability to market who you are with the V-plow.
Oh, for sure. Like I said, I think it's definitely an asset when you're getting into a drainage industry to have something like this.
Does the V-plow, the future of that, have an opportunity for other options of sizes where you could put in a 6-inch?
There are self-contained V-plow systems. Most of them are in Europe.
Okay.
So they're a lot more popular over there.
Yeah.
They're a lot more stringent about soil erosion and stuff over there also. So they've got ones that go all the way up to 8-inch. So it is a fully self-contained system.
Yeah.
It's not just an attachment shank. That is what you're running. That's the 8, the 4, the 6, whatever you're putting through that thing up to a certain size.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's what people don't realize is when you get to Europe, you have high population and very small agricultural areas, and then within those agricultural areas, the fields are really small because of the high population. So
they are a lot smaller fields over there. It's a big farm there is a small farm over here.
Yeah. I've been to the Netherlands as one place, and you get, if you got a 200-acre farm, it's a big farm.
Yeah.
And there's so much more activity of just everyday life, people, cars driving by your farm.
Cars, people moving back and forth, and the regulations themselves are much higher than anything we deal with over here.
Yeah. So from an erosion standpoint, from even being able to see it, the aesthetics of it on what a shank plow or a V-plow do are two different things. And so sometimes I think over there, they don't even want them to know what's happening in their field. And
not really. No, I don't believe so. It's gonna.
Yeah. So appreciate that. And talking about the V-plow, let's talk a little bit more just around business and your company. I know one thing we didn't talk about before, but I had forgot. But you had an outlet a couple years ago that you were a different type of outlet that you were pushing at the NRCS, or that you had shared with them.
Oh yeah, the intake
Yeah.
box.
Yeah. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And tell me a little bit about that, how that's worked, because I never did have an opportunity to talk to you about it.
So we're basically taking out intakes and we're putting a basket in there, with plastic welded 4-inch couplers and stuff in there, tap tees. The entire thing is custom fit to whatever size main you got, how deep you want it to be. And you can dig down a little bit, take the top off if you need to clean it off and stuff. But more or less is just coming to those guys that have that real sharp area of intake, where they got 20 acres just going into a small area, and how intakes work. You get a little bit of dirt and water movement and it just escalates very quickly.
Yeah.
So I went and got a basket design that basically we can take out the intake, put it online or in line with the mains, kind of take out and either loop everything together, either fill it up with rock or fill it up back with native soil, or it's one of those things where we're going to do a starburst pattern and we'll just drop the plow in, go up to where the water would leave naturally, and let that entire thing work underground instead of having an open surface intake. And the one farmer who he does a lot of erosion control practices, he did have guys out from the state this summer, and they were looking at it because he had, I think, 42 acres going into it, and it was washing out every year, and it was just basically something he had to fix every year. Even if he had a Hinken bottom up there, it would just keep filling up until, the water couldn't get to it, or it would just keep sucking dirt in.
Yeah.
But he had the state out there, and they finally got to the point where they got a hold of me. They were like, this is something we might be interested in. We think has some applications. It's more or less just a soil control issue.
Yeah. And I think that's really...
and keeping that soil where it should be instead of letting it get into a tile line, which will always cause problems, or outlet it into the ditch and just losing that soil.
Yeah. Well, when you see the beehive intakes and things like that, after a while you got to add on to them.
You got to build them up, or you got to scrape them out. And not only that, is you got to work around them.
Yeah, and the reason is because the soil's leaving, right?
Yeah,
that's why you have to do that. And so all for figuring out and understanding better ways to do this.
Yeah, and he hasn't had that. I think. What was our wettest year? Was it last year?
Last year, yeah.
He said he lost the area in there, and this is a fully covered intake. There's no opening to it anymore. Said he lost area of a mid-sized car. He said about 36 hours, all that water was gone.
Wow. Yeah, that's really impressive. Because we had, and I don't know exactly where that is, but you're talking an area that had some rains that were more than one, that were over 6 inches.
Yeah, I was right in that area where we were getting those 19-inch rain this past summer.
Yeah. Which is really remarkable when you look at that whole area too. We should do a podcast sometime just on that. Is literally what you just said. People aren't going to know, and they're going to think he didn't say that right. 19 inches. No, it was a small area, but it was a pretty large area that had over 10, like almost a county wide.
A huge area, but he said he lost about an area of a car.
Yeah, that's impressive.
And it's one of those things where farmers don't want to work around intakes anymore either.
Right.
When you were spot tiling, they had their place, back in the day. This is my bad spot. I want an intake in here. I want to get rid of the water.
Yeah.
Now, if you got a fully integrated pattern tile system, these things work great.
Yeah. So Kyle, tell me a little bit about your services you provide as a you farm drainage contractor, but what else are you guys doing to keep yourself busy?
We do septic systems, foundations. We actually do city sewer and water services. Okay. We're on call for Atwater, Grove City, or not Atwater, Lake Lillian, and Cosmos.
Okay.
So we repair water mains and service lines. We repair private stuff all the time,
Sure. and third generation. Grandpa started the business. You've been working with your dad since you're 9.
I've been started working with Morris when I was 9. I had to negotiate with him.
Yeah, which that taught you a lot.
Yes, it did. He probably won out better than I did.
So what's what's your desire or your dream for the future of your business? Got kids that are...
Yep, I've got 3 children.
Yeah.
I got a daughter. She has been out. She's mostly out for the 4-wheeler is what she's out for.
Yeah.
When she's in the field. But even when she was 3 years old, she was putting down flags and she was dropping tees for me.
Yeah, nice.
And then I got a 3-year-old boy. He loves machinery. That seems to be his passion.
Yeah. Well,
He'll see a backhoe half a mile off in a field. He's like, excavator.
Yeah, cool. That's the right way to get your kids kind of interested, and you never know where it goes from there. But it's nice to keep that legacy going.
Yep. Every kid's different. Some of them love it. Some of them don't.
Yeah.
I'm one of 6, and I do most of the dirt work stuff.
Sure. Do you have partners with like siblings in your business too, or are they in different businesses?
Most of them are in different businesses. Steven's got a grain bin construction company too. So, my youngest brother and brother-in-law head that up, and then my one brother, he has a service business for grain bins and dryers and stuff like that. So that's kind of his deal. My sister, she's our bookkeeper.
Sure.
And our HR person.
I know when you in the Atwater Grove City Walmer area, when you talk about the Whitcombs, if you don't know them well, you don't know which one you're talking about, because you guys are all pretty industrious.
It's a pretty large family.
Industrious and entrepreneurial, and so it's to be commended. It's great that you guys are out there in the providing services to the community and working hard. So appreciate that. And I appreciate you stepping into the V-plow thing and offering something to, farmers that are looking for something different than just the traditional way of drainage. And I think as the possibility of no-till grows, the business is going to grow too, because no-till is really linked to having your proper water management plan in place in order.
Yeah, you have to have a proper management in place. If you're trying to do no-till and you just got a couple strings of tile in there, it's gonna be a little bit of a rough ride for you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for joining me today. Anything you wanna add, or?
No, I think I'm good.
All right. Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate Kyle Whitcomb Farm Drainage.
Thank you.